I clutched my worn backpack a little tighter, my heart hammering against my ribs as I scanned the unfamiliar signs lining the corridor walls, all in Mandarin, a language I had spent the last 2 years struggling to master. Sophie Adams, 18 years old. American exchange student about to step into advanced calculus, one of the most feared classes in the entire school. My sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished floor as I found room 203. Inside, students already filled most of the seats. Neat uniforms, black hair heads, bent low over notebooks. The room buzzed with a soft hum of Mandarin chatter, quick and fluid, punctuated occasionally by bursts of laughter. And then there was me. Blonde, pale foreign. I swallowed hard and stepped inside the sudden quiet, almost deafening. Heads turned. Whispers started. Look, it's the foreigner. Does she even know what calculus is? Probably here just because she's rich. Their words weren't cruel exactly, not loud, not sneering, but they stung all the same, slipping into my skin like tiny needles. I kept my eyes low, sliding into a seat near the back. The teacher arrived moments later, Professor Liu, a tall man with steel gray hair and sharp, assessing eyes. He wore a simple white shirt and slacks, but his presence filled the room with an invisible pressure. Without a word, he began writing complex equations across the board, his strokes fast and precise. I recognized some of the symbols, integrals, derivatives, infinite series, but the combinations were intimidating even for me. Around me, students nodded sagely, some already scribbling notes. A knot tightened in my stomach. No matter how hard I had studied, no matter how many late nights I had spent poring over textbooks, I didn't belong here, at least not in their eyes. As Professor Liu lectured, I tried to focus, tried to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of calculus. But it was hard. Every whispered joke, every sideways glance, gnawed at my concentration. During the short break, when Professor Liu stepped out to speak with another teacher, the whispers grew louder. She probably doesn't even understand half of this. Americans are good at sports, not math. She must feel so out of place. I gripped my pencil tightly enough that my knuckles whitened. They didn't know me. They didn't know anything about me. They didn't know about the nights I spent alone in the library back home solving problems until my vision blurred. They didn't know about the scholarships I fought for, the competitions I entered because I couldn't afford private tutors. They didn't know about the battles I had already won to stand here today among them. And yet in their eyes, I was already less, already invisible, already dismissed. I stared down at my notebook, the lines and graphs blurring together. Part of me wanted to shrink back, to disappear, to make it easier on myself. But somewhere deeper, somewhere stubborn, a flame stirred. I didn't come all this way to stay silent. The door creaked open again. Professor Liu returned, carrying a stack of papers, but instead of handing them out, he walked straight to the board. He picked up a piece of chalk, and in a flurry of swift motions, drew a sprawling equation across the black surface. A monstrous thing, dense with variables, complex fractions, nested functions. A low ripple of awe and fear went through the room. Professor Liu turned, surveying us coolly. "This," he said in crisp Mandarin, "is a problem given at last year's national math competition. Almost no one solved it. Who will try?" Silence. Students shifted in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. No one moved. Not a single hand raised. Professor Liu's gaze sharpened. He waited. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Still no volunteers. The air grew thick with tension every second, a drumbeat against my ribs. And then before I could stop myself, before fear could cage me again, I moved. I pushed back my chair, the scraping noise absurdly loud in the stillness. Every head turned. The whispers halted, replaced by stunned silence. I stood heart-hammering in my chest and slowly made my way to the front. The only sound was the soft tap of my sneakers against the tiled floor. I felt 100 eyes boring into my back. I felt the weight of every expectation and every doubt settle on my shoulders. Still, I walked. Still, I stood before the board. Still, I picked up the chalk with steady fingers. And as I stared at the sprawling equation, something inside me clicked. This was my language, not Mandarin, not whispers, not prejudice. This. The language of logic, of numbers, of truth. And in that moment, standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of a foreign classroom, I realized something. I didn't need anyone's permission to prove I belonged. The chalk felt dry and unfamiliar between my fingers, a slight dusting of powder clinging to my skin. I could sense the tension behind me, thick and tangible, an audience, waiting, expecting, almost willing me to fail. I pushed the noise from my mind. Focus, Sophie, just focus. The equation on the board sprawled like a labyrinth, dense and tangled. But piece by piece, I started to dismantle it in my mind. The first move was clear, a substitution, u Jean-Georges x2 plus 3x u x2 plus 3x. I wrote carefully, the chalk whispering against the blackboard. Each stroke echoed unnaturally loud in the silent room. Behind me, a few students shifted in their seats, the rustle of fabric sharp against the hush. I heard someone murmur under their breath, probably betting how soon I'd mess up. I ignored it. Solvi for du, do rewrite, the integral simplify. The steps unfolded in my mind like stepping stones across a deep river. After the first few lines, I paused, stepping slightly aside to review my work. A low, almost imperceptible stir ran through the classroom. Some of the students were leaning forward now, eyebrows furrowed, not in mockery, but in confusion. They hadn't expected me to even get this far. I allowed myself a small hidden smile. I continued. One line, then another. Each move deliberate, each transition precise. Factor here, complete the square there. Recognize the hidden symmetry buried deep inside the problem's heart. My world narrowed down to the blackboard, the chalk, and the deep, rhythmic certainty that I knew exactly what I was doing. The whispers had stopped. Now there was only breathing, quiet, strained. Someone dropped a pencil in the far corner, and the sharp clatter made the whole room flinch. Still, I wrote. Halfway through, I glanced at Professor Liu out of the corner of my eye. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable, but his gaze was locked sharply onto the board following every move. Not dismissive, not skeptical. Focused. Attentive. For the first time since setting foot in this classroom, I felt seen not as a novelty, not as an outsider, but as a mind. Line by line, the equation unraveled under my hands. Simplifications that seemed impossible at first collapsed into elegant, flowing expressions. Variables fell away. Limits emerged cleanly. It was like sculpting, chiseling away the noise until only the essential truth remained. I reached the final step, heart thundering in my chest. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. If I made a mistake now after coming this far, no, I wouldn't. I set the chalk carefully to the board and drew the final line underneath my answer. A single simple result. Elegant. Complete. Undeniable. I stepped back, the chalk falling from my fingers onto the small tray with a soft clink. Silence swallowed the room whole. It wasn't the silence of doubt anymore. It was something heavier, something closer to awe. I turned slowly to face the room. Rows of wide eyes stared back at me. Some students had their mouths slightly open. Some gripped their desks without realizing it. One boy near the front, the same boy who had laughed earlier, looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. I glanced at Professor Liu. He stood still, hands clasped lightly behind his back, gaze scanning my solution line by line. The seconds dragged like hours. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying effortlessly through the stunned air. Excellent, he said simply. A ripple ran through the room like a thread snapping loose. Professor Liu turned to face the class fully. Learn from her, he said, not because she is American, not because she is different. Learn because she worked harder than you. A blush rose to my cheeks, hot and sharp. But beneath it, a fierce, bright pride began to bloom. I returned to my seat slowly, not with slumped shoulders or lowered eyes. With my head high. With every step, I felt the shift in the room. The looks that had once been mocking were now questioning, respectful, some even admiring. The silence that had once isolated me now wrapped around me like a warm, stunned embrace. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. For the first time, they really saw me. Not as a foreigner, not as a joke, but as a peer. The bell rang sharp and clear, cutting through the heavy stillness of the classroom. Students began gathering their things, but the usual chatter was missing. Instead, there was a kind of thick, charged quiet, as if the entire room was still recalibrating after what had just happened. I slipped my notebook into my backpack, careful not to meet anyone's eyes. Old habits die hard. I was used to being invisible. Or worse, being noticed only to be doubted. I didn't expect anything different, not really. I swung my bag over my shoulder and made my way toward the door. Sophie, I froze. It wasn't the teacher's voice. It was hesitant, almost shy. I turned. It was Lena Jo, the girl who always sat 2 rows in front of me. Sleek black hair glasses, perched neatly on her nose, usually surrounded by a small circle of friends. She clutched her notebook tightly against her chest, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. She began faltering slightly. Your solution, it was really good. Around her, a few other students lingered, pretending to shuffle papers, but clearly listening. I blinked, caught off guard. Thank you, I said quietly. Lena hesitated, then rushed forward, her words tumbling over themselves. Would you maybe sometime explain that substitution method you used, the part with completing the square I didn't fully understand? Her voice cracked slightly at the end, and she winced. I almost laughed, not at her, but out of pure disbelief. Was this real? They wanted my help. I nodded, finding my voice. Of course, I said, I'd be happy to. The tightness in Lena's posture relaxed visibly. Behind her, 2 more students approached a boy named Chen and another girl I recognized, but whose name escaped me. Chen scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Yeah, me too. He said, that method I didn't even see the symmetry until you showed it. The other girl nodded vigorously. Maybe we could all study together sometime. Something inside me shifted like a window opening after years of being shut. It wasn't instant acceptance. It wasn't friendship, not yet. But it was a start. A small crack in the walls that had kept me separate. And maybe a chance to build something more. As we filed out of the classroom together, I noticed Professor Liu standing by the door. He met my eyes for a brief moment, his expression still calm, still inscrutable, but there was the faintest nod of approval. I returned it with a small, respectful bow of my head. A silent exchange. No congratulations, no fanfare. Just acknowledgement, recognition, respect. The afternoon sun was warm against my face as we stepped into the courtyard. Students milled around in small groups, laughing, chatting as usual. But as we passed, a few heads turned. Some offered small, almost imperceptible nods. A few smiled, tentative but genuine. I didn't smile back immediately. I wasn't ready yet. Trust takes time. But I felt the weight on my chest lift just a little. Later that evening, sitting by the window of my tiny dorm room, I opened my calculus textbook. Outside, the city of Shenzhen shimmered under the setting sun, skyscrapers catching the last gold light of the day. I stared at the formulas on the page, but my mind kept drifting back to the moment at the blackboard, the stillness, the focus, the certainty. For the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't fighting for permission to exist here. I had earned my place, not through words, not through begging for acceptance, through action, through truth, through my own hands, my own mind. I smiled to myself, a small private smile. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges. Prejudices don't disappear overnight. But today I had cracked the shell, and it felt like the beginning of something good, something real. The next morning, the sun poured bright gold over the school courtyard, and for once, I didn't feel invisible as I crossed it. A few classmates nodded in greeting. Lena even waved a small, hesitant wave, but genuine. I returned it, still feeling the lingering glow of yesterday's unexpected breakthrough. As I approached room 203 for another grueling calculus session, I noticed something unusual. Professor Liu was already inside, standing by his desk, an official-looking notice pinned to the blackboard behind him. The students filed in, buzzing with soft speculation. Once the room had settled, Professor Liu cleared his throat. I have an announcement, he said, voice steady. Our school has been invited to participate in the International Youth Mathematics Challenge. Murmurs of excitement broke out instantly. The IYMC was famous a fierce academic competition that drew brilliant students from across Asia and beyond. Each participating school, Professor Liu continued, may nominate 1 student to represent them in the individual competition and 2 students for the team challenge. All eyes sharpened. This was a big deal. Winning or even participating could open doors to top universities, scholarships, internships. After much consideration, Professor Liu said, I have selected the representative for the individual round. He paused, letting the tension build. Then he looked directly at me. Miss Adams. The room froze. I blinked, unsure if I had heard correctly. Me, representing the school, in an international competition. A beat of silence passed, thick, stunned. Then the whispers began a low, rippling wave. But she's American. Can she even compete for us? I mean, she's good, but... I could feel the heat rushing to my face, but I forced myself to stay still. Professor Liu raised a hand, and the room fell quiet again. Miss Adams, he said calmly, earned this opportunity through demonstrated ability. This school values excellence above all. His gaze swept the class, daring anyone to object further. No one spoke. Some students shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at me with new calculation in their eyes, not scornful, but measuring, reassessing. A few like Lena smiled faintly. Professor Liu moved on, announcing the two team participants, Chen and another senior Mei Li. But my heart was hammering too loud to hear much else. I had never even dared dream of something like this. To compete. To represent. Not just to belong, but to stand out. After class, as I packed my books, Lena approached her steps a little more confident today. Congratulations, she said, her voice sincere. Thanks. I breathed, still a little dazed. Chen passed by, giving me a nod, not overly friendly, but not dismissive either. It was more than I could have hoped for. Much more. Later that night, back in my tiny dorm room, I stared at the official invitation email blinking on my laptop screen. I reread it 3 times. Then a 4th. I still half expected it to vanish like a dream, slipping through my fingers. But it stayed. Solid. Real. I closed my laptop gently and leaned back against the creaky old chair. Outside, the neon lights of Shenzhen flickered against the inky sky. Somewhere far below, traffic hummed, life moving on. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet certainty began to take root. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was rising. Not because I needed to prove anything to them, but because for the first time in a long time, I believed in myself. The morning of the competition dawned gray and cold, the sky over Shenzhen thick with clouds that threatened rain. I stood outside the entrance of the academic conference center, my breath misting in the chilly air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. All around me, students from across the region milled about, some chatting animatedly, others pacing, reviewing notes, their faces drawn tight with nerves. I clutched my worn messenger bag, feeling the heavy weight of expectation and skepticism pressing down on me. Here I was, an American girl, an outsider, representing a Chinese academy in one of the toughest math competitions in Asia. I could feel the stares. Some curious, some doubtful, some openly disbelieving. Inside the main hall, we were seated in neat rows, each participant given a blank pad of paper and a pencil. The rules were simple. 1 hour. 5 problems. No calculators. No outside assistance. Just your mind against the most brutal problems a team of international professors could devise. The proctor gave the signal, and I flipped over the exam sheet. The problems glared back at me, vicious integrals, labyrinthine proofs, brain-twisting sequences. For a few heart-stopping seconds, panic clawed at my chest. What if I couldn't do it? What if they were right? What if... Focus, Sophie. I closed my eyes, briefly breathed in, breathed out, and let the noise fall away. When I opened my eyes again, I was somewhere else, a calm, centered place where only the problems existed. I started to work. One by one, the problems yielded not easily, not without a fight, but steadily. I could feel the old rhythm take over. Scan the problem. Find the hidden structure. Apply the right strategy. It wasn't magic. It was discipline, practice, passion. Around me, other students scribbled furiously or chewed their pencils in frustration. The boy across the aisle crumpled his 3rd sheet of paper head in his hands. But I kept moving. Line after line. Step after step. Steady, precise. When the proctor called time, I looked down at my paper, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear anymore, but from exhilaration. I had answered every question. Not perfectly, maybe, but completely. Honestly, with everything I had. The results wouldn't be announced until the closing ceremony in the afternoon, so we were released for lunch. I wandered through the campus courtyard, too wired to eat, feeling both heavy and light all at once. Was it enough? Had I done enough? At the ceremony, the hall buzzed with anticipation. Professor Liu sat near the front with a group of faculty members, his expression as inscrutable as ever. Chen and Mei Li waved at me from across the room, offering small, encouraging smiles. I sat down near the back, heart-hammering fingers, twisting the strap of my bag. The announcer, a distinguished professor from Beijing University, took the stage. He spoke in polished Mandarin, and I strained to keep up through the formal vocabulary. First, the team awards. Applause thundered as school after school was called. Then came the individual honors. Third place, the announcer said, goes to Wang Shu of Beijing No. 4 High School. Applause. Second place, Liu Rong of Shanghai Academy. More applause. And first place, the hall held its breath. The announcer smiled. Goes to Sophie Adams, representing Shenzhen International Academy. For a split second, I thought I had misheard. Then the room erupted. Some polite applause, some gasps, some startled murmurs. I rose on shaking legs, made my way to the stage under 100 burning gazes, some approving, some incredulous, some grudging. Professor Liu caught my eye as I passed. For once, a rare, fleeting smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Pride. Genuine pride. The metal felt heavy around my neck as the flash of cameras lit up the stage. And standing there in front of an audience that had once doubted I even deserved a seat in their classroom, I felt it. Not just victory. Not just validation. Freedom. Freedom from the whispers. Freedom from the need to prove myself to anyone but me. I had come to China as an outsider. I had been judged, doubted, overlooked. And I had answered all of it, not with anger, not with words, but with my mind, my heart, and my quiet, unwavering persistence. This was my language, and today the whole world had heard it. The Monday after the competition, the sky over Shenzhen was brilliantly clear, the sun gleaming against the glass towers and green courtyards. As I walked through the school gates, metal tucked inside my backpack, I felt an unfamiliar stillness inside me. Not fear, not anxiety. Something steadier, like a quiet river running deep. The courtyard buzzed with the usual morning energy, students in crisp uniforms chatting and laughing, but something was different. Heads turned as I passed, but not with the curious, skeptical glances I was used to. Today, the looks were warm, respectful. Lena hurried over her face, lighting up when she saw me. "Congratulations, Sophie," she said breathlessly, clutching her books to her chest. Before I could even respond, Chen jogged up beside her, flashing a rare, easy grin. "You killed it," he said simply, nodding in admiration. Other students nearby chimed in. "Your solution to problem 3 was insane. I heard the professors were talking about your proof after the ceremony. You're amazing." I blinked, stunned for a moment. Not because I didn't think I deserved it, but because it was the first time they said it out loud. No hesitation. No half-hidden disbelief. Just genuine acknowledgement. Inside room 203, the atmosphere was different too. Some students waved as I entered. A few even scooted over to make room for me to sit closer to the front. I chose a seat near Lena and Chen, feeling the corners of my mouth curve into a soft, involuntary smile. Professor Liu entered a few minutes later, carrying his usual stack of notes. But today, before starting the lecture, he paused. He set down the papers and looked around the room. "I hope you all learned something important from this experience," he said. His gaze swept across us and landed briefly on me. Not just about mathematics, but about assumptions about judgment and about where true excellence comes from. A thoughtful hush settled over the class. No one needed him to say more. The lesson had already been taught, not through a formula, but through a quiet girl, standing before a blackboard, changing minds with chalk and truth. After class, as I packed my books, Lena leaned over. "Hey," she said, her voice shy again. "Some of us were thinking of starting a study group. Would you want to join?" I blinked, touched more deeply than I could say. "I'd love to," I said, and I meant it. Not because I needed to prove anything anymore, not because I was desperate for acceptance, but because somewhere along the way, this had become my place too. Not by demanding it, not by shouting louder, by being who I was. Unapologetically. Steadily. Honestly. That evening, I sat by my dorm room window, the city lights blinking alive one by one. I sipped a cup of jasmine tea, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers. I thought about the journey, the fear, the doubts, the long nights of studying the silent prayers whispered into the darkness. And I smiled. Not a timid, tentative smile. A real one. The kind that comes from knowing you fought your battle and won on your own terms. I wasn't just the American girl anymore. I wasn't just the outsider. I was Sophie Adams. Student, mathematician, competitor, friend. And most importantly, I was enough. Always had been. Always would be.